Hello, hello. I'm Casey,
I'm Fallon.
and this is Render the
the
Darkness. All right, so today's case is coming at you out of our 50 state series. Yes, we're still doing that. And today we are on Louisiana. Before we jump into what the case is about and the case itself, let me go ahead and give you your fun fact. Your fun fact is that carrots have been cultivated for over 5,000 years, and they actually originated in Afghanistan and Persia. Yeah, it's your little fun carrot fact.
I like carrots with ranch.
Yeah, I do too.
Sometimes.
I like carrots, but I can't do I can do a cooked carrot if it's in like a stew, but if it's like, I can't do it as like an individual side
Yeah.
for a dish.
Yeah, it has to be like in a roast or.
It has to be like mixed in with something.
Yeah.
All right, so now that you have your fun fact, the episode today is going to be over the Bayou Strangler. I actually had never heard of him.
Really?
It's crazy because I lived in Louisiana for a while, so you'd think I would have. And I went to school there, so you'd think I would have.
Yeah.
I had not. So let's dive into who this demented person was and what all he did. So, his name was Ronald Joseph Dominique, and he was born in Thibodaux, Louisiana on January 9th, 1964. Ronald had 5 siblings, and he was the youngest of 6. The family definitely lived a life of pretty extreme poverty. Ronald attended Thibodaux High School, and while doing so, was the subject of some pretty extreme bullying. Mm-hmm. Ronald was described as having a very melancholy disposition. He was overweight. He had very obvious low self-esteem. He was not athletic in any way, and he had a poor communication skill. I don't know how to explain it other than he was described as socially odd, quiet, and awkward. Was the best descriptions that I could find.
I'm sure the kids and stuff in school probably didn't make it any better.
I'm sure not. And I don't know if it's true or not, but there were also some town rumors that his mom was in an incestual relationship with her brother, and the bullying because of that rumor, combined with all of his individual personality traits and physical attributes, really created a very intense bullying environment for him when he was growing up. So, didn't have a great childhood. So, and just to clarify on that rumor, I don't know for sure if she actually was or not, but I did read it, so I'm including it because that's what I do. If I read something and it's in more than one resource, I will include it just to be safe. So, and again, I'm not justifying any of what he grows up to do at all, but you do have to have some sympathy for the kid.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's kind of like we bring them up sometimes, but Ash and Elena feel bad for the kid, not the adult.
Yeah. I don't care how bad your childhood is. It doesn't justify growing up to do the things that some of these people grow up to do. Yeah. But I do feel bad because he did very clearly have a very rough childhood. It also might kind of explain some of his later behaviors when we get into those. And I also read that Ronald may even have walked in and caught his mom and his uncle in the act at one point.
Ew.
But again, that's just something that I've read, so I'm including it. Another thing that contributed to his bullying was his discovery and exploration that he may be gay. He apparently started going to some of the local gay bars. And unfortunately for Robert, some of his classmates had seen him there. So you can imagine how little, especially for the time, that helped.
Well, I mean, how did they see him there?
Because they were across the, like, they were in the neighborhood, but not at the
I thought
gay
they were
bar.
like at the bar. And
No,
like,
no.
We seen you at the bar, and it's like
No.
they were there.
No, they weren't at the bar.
They seemed like going in or out.
Correct.
Yeah.
They were just in the vicinity and seeing him enter or exit, one of the two. So he also was in the Glee Club, which in the 60s was almost an automatic guarantee of bullying. So it just seemed like, bullying triggers were just stacked on top of themselves when it came to reasons for him to get or be bullied. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that they're reasons, I'm just saying that at the time, those were things people commonly got bullied for individually, let alone putting them all in one pot.
Right.
He would go on to graduate high school in 1983, and when he did, he began studying at Nicholls State University for computer science, and he was also starting to test the waters a little more inside of the local gay community, and he mostly did this in and around New Orleans. From what I could tell through reading, most of him being outcasted stemmed from his very awkward demeanor and personality. So he really wasn't even accepted into the gay community. Not because they cared whether or not he was gay. It's just because his personality was so off-putting, I guess. So on June 12th of 1985, when Dominique was 21, he received his first criminal charge for phone harassment. Apparently, he was prank calling people. 8 years later, his level of crime breaking increased astronomically. He reportedly, quote unquote, raped a man. I'm going to say graped.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I want to make sure I heard you right, because I was like, wait, what?
You did.
Okay.
But that word is used a lot. I know people don't like when you use the supplemental words, but when it comes to these kinds of videos, there are certain words you're not really supposed to use, and if you use them a certain amount of times, it will get your video flagged and pulled, and that word is going to be, in this case, a lot.
Gotcha.
So, if I was only going to say it once or twice, I wouldn't do that, but it's in this case a lot.
Okay, gotcha.
So that is also my trigger warning as well. That is talked about a lot in this case. So if that is a trigger, please skip this episode. But apparently he did that to a man, and the man did report it to police, but we got to remember what time frame that this happened in. And by this point, it was 1993. And from what I read, the victim was kind of a drifter who had been setting up a drug deal with Dominic. And the young man wanted to purchase some marijuana from him. And when the man arrived to complete the purchase, Dominic would convince the man to step into the bathroom while he retrieved the drugs. He claimed he didn't want the man to see where he kept it. Shortly after he entered the bathroom, Dominic called... I don't know if it's Dominic or Dominique. I Google translated it, and it gave me both. And I hate to call him by his first name because I don't think he deserves the respect of being called by his first name. But I'm probably going to call him Robert from this point forward. Or Ronald from this point forward. Sorry, Ronald from this point forward. Just because I'm not 100% confident that I'm pronouncing his last name right.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'm going to call him Ronald. Anyway, shortly after he entered the bathroom, Ronald called for him to come out, and the young man opened the door to a gun in his face. Ronald proceeded to handcuff and sexually assault the man. When he was finished with the assault, he uncuffed his victim and let him go. The young man went straight to the police station to report the assault. Unfortunately, the police didn't really seem to take the report too seriously because with the time. Police put the complaint report on a shelf where it would just sit and collect dust. I think that, too, a lot of that played into it wasn't common for a man to report something like that, for one, and especially wasn't common for a man to report something like that against another man. Not, again, that is any justification at all.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, I think at that time frame that's kind of the mindset, really, is what I understood when I was reading. So anyway, 3 years later, another report of a similar attack would be filed against, I'm just going to say Dominic, against Dominic, only this time, instead of a gun, pew pew, it was a knife. And instead of cuffs, he had been tied up. And this would become his MO from that point forward, kind of. So this being the second report against the same perpetrator, wasn't so easy to turn a blind eye this time, and police would arrest Dominic, and he would sit in jail and wait for his trial to start. According to Dominic, this little stint in jail was the trigger that would catapult his crimes to the extreme they would become. He claimed he was extremely and routinely abused in prison, not only psychologically, but physically as well. According to him, he was so brutally gang-raped at one point that he had to go to the hospital and have his rectum stitched because it had been ripped open during the assault.
Oh my.
The mindset this abuse left him with was to promise himself that he would never go back behind bars. And how did his brain convince him he was going to guarantee that? You'd think by just not committing any more crimes.
That would be the best way.
But clearly that wasn't his thought process, or we wouldn't be here talking about him right now. So, he thought, if I don't leave any victims, this is a quote, if I don't leave any victims, they can't report me, end quote.
Oh, no.
So, that was his solution. No more leaving victims alive. As for the charges against him for his second reported assault, although he was held in jail until his trial, by the time the trial was actually set to start, unfortunately, his accuser, who was also a drifter, he had drifted and disappeared. And without his testimony against Dominic, there would be a lack of evidence and he would go free. So that takes us to his first murder victim, which was David Mitchell, who worked at the St. Charles Parish Hospital. David was living with his sister when he didn't come home, and his mother had received a call from the hospital asking if David was okay because he hadn't shown up for his shift. And that was extremely out of character for him. He was very punctual and never missed a shift. So his mom called his sister to check on him, and that's when his sister realized that his uniform and his badge were still at the house. Tragically, and this is really sad. I mean, the whole case is really sad. This is really sad. So, tragically, the reporting of a young male body being found with strangulation marks and his pants down was immediately blasted all over the news because they rushed to the scene and began live reporting. And they did this before the body had even been identified by police. And horrifically enough, the news outlet would show the man's face, and David's sister was watching the report coverage. And that is how they found out that he had been murdered. She immediately recognized that it was her brother. Shortly after, the police would arrive to inform the family, but because of the news, they already knew. The last time his family had seen him alive was on July 13th, 1997, at a family birthday party. According to later testimony from Dominic, he had met David at a gay bar. He convinced David to step outside, and that's when Dominic would proceed to, quote-unquote, assault and strangle David before tossing his body on the side of the road. Next victim wasn't until 5 months later. His name was Gary Pierre. He had a very similar build as David. So you'll see a profile preference as we discuss the victims. And I will say that I actually couldn't find just a whole lot on most of the victims as far as their personal information, which sadly tends to be the case a lot.
I was gonna say, I hate it when that happens, and it happens quite often.
It happens a lot. You'd think there would be just as much information out about who the victims were as human beings as there is who the serial killer was as a person, but there rarely ever is. So normally I like to give as much insight into who the victims were as I can, but sometimes the information is just simply not there, or at least not findable sometimes. But Gary's body was found in St. Charles Parish on December 14th, 1997, and he too had been assaulted and strangled to death. Next, we fast forward to July 31st, 1998, when the next victim was found. His name was Larry Ranson. Larry had a wife. Her name was Teresa Davis Ranson. He also had a son and a stepdaughter, and he was from Hahnville, Louisiana. Victim number 4 would be Oliver Ollie LeBanks. He was born May 29th, 1971. I also read that some people like to call him Bo as well. And he was born in 1971 in New Orleans Parish, Louisiana. He was working as a dishwasher at a restaurant called the Old Dog New Trick Cafe. He had been in a long-term relationship with a woman named Jennifer. He had 5 daughters, 6 brothers, and one resource said 5, so just in case, I'm going to put that. He also had 2 sisters. Unfortunately, over time, Oliver would develop a drug problem that would increase once the owner of the cafe had fired him due to his drug use. So after that happened, it got worse. So now at this point, he was seeking drugs and money. And just like the disgusting, miserable person he was, enter Dominic. Dominic frequented the French Quarter, specifically the gay clubs, but he wasn't there for a leisurely night out like most people were. He was using the clubs as a place to scope out his victims. This is how Oliver and Dominic would cross paths. Sometimes, out of sheer desperation, Oliver would sell whatever he had, and sometimes all he had was himself. Dominic and Oliver found themselves in the same bar one night. The bar was called the Rawhide. Oliver looking for a low-risk client to earn a quick buck on, and Dominic looking for his next victim. Oliver noticed Dominic, thought he seemed pretty awkward and out of place, which to him made him seem like a pretty low-risk client. He then approached him. According to Dominic, they began a conversation that quickly escalated to a business transaction, and the men left the bar and headed towards Dominic's car. I will let you know that this does get a little bit graphic, so again, a trigger warning. If that's something you're sensitive to, I would definitely say skip ahead. Anyway, they were on their way to Dominic's car to complete the agreed upon deal or proposition, however you want to say that. And again, next part's descriptive. I cut as much out, but if you're sensitive to it, again, I would definitely fast forward. Sorry, I don't have my computer. I'm having to do this on my notebook. I'm sorry. So, in case you keep seeing my notebook flip up, this is my notes. So, according to Dominic, they initially agreed that Oliver would perform oral sex on him for $30, but once they were in the vehicle, it quickly escalated from that to them performing oral on each other, to Dominic flipping Oliver over and assaulting him, then Dominic demanding Oliver to rub his penis on Dominic's anus. Dominic was convinced he had felt Oliver, quote-unquote, slip in for a second, which sent Dominic into a full-on rage because, if you remember, his prison injury. That made Dominic terrified of anal penetration because he thought it would rip the old wound back open. And in his rage, Dominic hit Oliver in the head with a tire iron until Oliver was unconscious. At that point, Dominic would go on to strangle him to death. His body was found on October 5th, 1998, under an overpass. This is when, after identifying Oliver and contacting his family, upon speaking to his brother, the police learned Oliver's last known location was the Rawhide Bar. They quickly began investigating the venue. Oliver was found shirtless, shoeless, and his pants around his ankle. Which you'll see a common pattern in the victims missing their shoes. Up to this point so far, all of them have been missing their shoes. So this is also when Lieutenant David Thornton really began heavily questioning the patrons. But shortly after the body of shortly after the body of Oliver was found, while they were investigating, before they could finish the investigation, the body of another young man would be found, and his name was Joseph Brown. He was also shoeless, shirtless, pants down, assaulted, and strangled. Okay. A few weeks later, the body of Bruce Williams was found, assaulted, and strangled. And by this point, we're in late November of 1998. His next victim was Manuel Reed. This murder took place on May 30th, 1999, according to Dominic. Again, he met Manuel at a bar. They intended to, quote-unquote, fool around, which they did begin doing once they made it to Dominic's vehicle. And just like before, initially Dominic had the upper hand, but at some point, Manuel turned the table. Then Manuel penetrated Dominic, which not only triggered his flashbacks to prison, but also, quote-unquote, hurt. So, that's when Dominic grabbed his tire iron and began bashing Manuel in the head, which led to Dominic strangling him. This time, though, instead of leaving his body on the side of the road, he would actually, in his rage and anger for Manuel penetrating him, he would actually throw his body in a dumpster. And quoting what Dominic said about that, like the piece of trash he was. End quote. That is what Dominic said. That is not what I said. A month after the discovery of Manuel, on June 30th, 1999, the body of Angel Mejia was found in front of a dumpster. By this point, the media really started paying attention and started reporting on the killings, which caused everybody to be concerned about a serial killer being in the area. And the media really ran with the fact that so many of the victims were missing their shoes. People were speculating what the meaning behind that might be. Did the killer have a foot fetish? Or was it just someone out stealing the shoes of the victims? What did that mean? Dominic's next victim, Mitchell Johnson. He too had been assaulted and strangled, but again, the disposal of the body was a little different than the previous victims. This time, Dominic went back in time a little, leaving Mitchell's body at the exact same spot that he had left Oliver LeBank's. This time, though, witnesses were able to give a description of the last person Mitchell was seen with. And after a sketch artist was able to put together a sketch. It was plastered in every newspaper in New Orleans. And as anyone would assume a serial killer would do, once that happened, Dominic quit his job and moved about 50 miles away. He chose the town of Houma, and he chose this spot because that's where his sister lived. He pulled his little mobile home trailer right up into his sister's yard and hooked up to her electricity and her water, and that's where he stayed. And he tried to stay as low profile as possible, but he also had to make money. So he started working for a place called Caro Produce. Apparently, he managed to build a pretty good reputation as a dependable and trustworthy employee by his coworkers, which meant he mostly was just ignored. So back to that setting for him. He also, he knew how to achieve that persona and perception just because that's what he had been used to his whole life. And that was kind of what he was going for here so he could stay low profile. It seemed to work for a while. And if he had stopped killing at this point, he may even have gotten away with all of the murders up to this point. But just like every other serial killer,
you're stupid.
I think it's more of like a urge that just manifests that they just can't subdue. I think is the best way to describe that from their perspective, not mine.
Right.
But anyway, so as we just discussed, he clearly did not quit killing. So that puts us to his next victim, Michael Vincent. He went missing on New Year's Eve, 1999, and was found the next day in a much different way than all the rest so far. Michael was found hanging over a barbed wire fence in the position of a scarecrow.
Oh my gosh.
After Michael, Dominic would take a 2-year break. However, despite his low-profile intentions, he would sort of put himself into view with a run-in with the law in May of 2000. He got into an altercation and was arrested for disturbing the peace. He received a ticket and a fine, sent on his way. And at this point, Dominic still worked at the produce place, but he was also, at night, he was a delivery driver for Domino's. So he was delivering pizza at night. So then in February of 2002, Dominic was at a Mardi Gras festival when he witnessed someone in a car bump a baby in a carriage. This caused Dominic to get into a scrapping match with the driver, who was a woman. He would end up slapping her in the face. Although he was arrested, he still really just got a slight slap on the wrist.
Well, she hit a baby with her car, though, right?
She bumped the baby carriage with the car and woke the baby up. She didn't injure the baby at all. Which is, I'm not saying that it's okay that she hit the baby with the car. Obviously, it's not at all. But also, you can't respond that way either.
I'm not. Sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Well, also, and again, I'm not justifying this at all, but if you've ever been to a Mardi Gras festival, especially when it comes to the vehicles and whatnot, and the people, the cars are bumper to bumper, and they have just enough space usually for people to walk through barely, and people are everywhere. And they don't care. They're not looking. And, people who are in the cars are typically distracted, especially if they're at the part where the parade is actually coming through. They're distracted by watching the parade come through. They're not paying attention. Plus, there's the drinking that happens during those things. And God knows what else happens at those things. And especially, again, in the time frame we're at this point, I'm not justifying it. I'm just saying you have to understand the environment as a whole.
That's understand. I understand, but I'd probably still do the same thing. In that scenario,
Then you too would probably be arrested.
Yeah, I'm sure I probably would, but I'd be like, I'd do it again. You can't be hitting a baby with your car, whether it's on purpose or not, and then get out and argue with me about it. No, ma'am. Pop.
Well, he did really just get a slap on the wrist for it, actually. He was required to do a short stint in a work release program, and then that was it. When he was done doing that, he was done. But this was also a trigger moment for Dominic in which his pent-up anger and rage would rise to its peak and end his break from his killing spree. So he once again was on the prowl for his next victim. He also would move his mobile home from his sister's yard to her husband's work, and he worked at the Dixie shipyard, which would ultimately give Dominic all the privacy he needed to carry out any dark fantasy he had brewing. His victim of choice turned out to be Kenneth Fitzgerald Jr. His body was found on October 2002. It's believed he chose him simply because he lived close and met his preferred profile for a victim. He'd been assaulted and choked. Next victim was a man named Annika Jones. He was often called Noka. He was described as loving, fun-loving, and family-oriented. He left behind his girlfriend, Shelley Weston, whom he loved very much. Noka left the couple's apartment on his bike to run errands and unfortunately would cross paths with a monster, Dominic. Noka did return home for a few minutes to let Shelley know he was going out for a bit after Dominic had told him he had a way for him to make money. Noka didn't tell Shelley anything about what he was going to do, only that he was, quote, going out for a smoke, end quote. Noka's body would be found at an overpass in Booty, not far from where they first met. While police were investigating Noka's murder, another body would turn up. The body of Detrell Woods. He was found in nothing but shorts and a pair of socks, much like a lot of the other victims, and his mother, Mitrell Woods, would be notified as soon as Detrell was identified. This is right around the time that Dominic would be laid off from Carol Produce and started working as a meter maid. His next victim was Larry Matthews. However, this time, the man who found Larry's body just happened to be neighbors with a man named Don Jerome, who was a criminologist. So when the man found Larry's body, he actually would go to Don rather than the police. Larry actually did have clothes on and a shirt and sweatpants, but as always, no shoes. This murder also happened while Tropical Storm Matthew was striking the area, and because of this, when Don called the police and they got him to the morgue, his cause of death wasn't immediately apparent because he had been out in the rain for a while. But it would eventually be determined he too was assaulted and strangled, but the fact that it took as long as it did for that to be discovered and Larry to be connected to the Bayou Strangler, as Dominic was now being referred to, that implied that they were initially trying to chalk Larry's death up as a result of the storm. What?
Just that they're trying to say that he died because of the storm.
Yeah, they were kind of, and I read a lot about this one because that also intrigued me, and they really were kind of trying to sweep this one under the rug for some reason. However, while they were still trying to cement a for sure connection in Larry's death, another victim would be discovered, Michael Barnett. And this time, he was disposed of a little different than the rest as well. His body was discovered after numerous complaints of a foul odor at a storage facility. His body was found stuffed in a storage unit by an employee who immediately called the police. His next victim was Leon Lorette, discovered on February 19th, 2005. Leon was unique as he connected to one of the other victims, Noka. During police investigation of Noka's death, they had actually questioned Leon, and Leon, who was really good friends with Noka, had actually bent over backwards to try to help the police solve Noka's murder.
Wow.
But now Leon was a victim himself.
Dang.
Shortly after Leon, the body of August Terrell Watkins would be found in Lafourche Parish on the edge of a ditch. He actually still had all of his clothes on. Upon investigating his death, they spoke to his girlfriend, who would give the police a lead by informing them that August had gotten into a white truck with a, quote, Caucasian male and an African-American female, end quote. And this was the best lead the police had gotten in a while. So they kind of ran with that, and she even gave them a slight description of what they looked like, which gave the police a little bit of a bigger direction to lean towards. So now they had a vehicle and a description. The police put out an APB on the truck and quickly started getting hits. One was a sighting of the truck behind a grocery store where August's bag of personal items was actually found. So a squad car was able to catch the truck as it was leaving and pulled it over. The officer immediately had the driver get out of the truck. The officer placed the man in cuffs and began questioning him while identifying him, but sadly it would turn out they had pulled over a man named Michael Joslin, not Ronald Dominic.
Dang.
After a few more questions, Michael was let go. Dominic's next victim was Kurt Cunningham. He was discovered in April of 2005. This victim was also strangled and assaulted. However, one difference was that this was actually the first Caucasian victim. Every other victim had been African American. Next victim, Alonzo Hogan. Shortly after he was found, Wayne Smith was found on August 16th, 2005. And at this point, the killings were becoming very close together and very rapid. It also was about the same time that New Orleans was hit with Hurricane Katrina. Obviously, this was a catastrophic and devastating event that left over 2,000 dead, which obviously became the primary focus for all of the police force at the time, which means Dominic was temporarily out of focus. He seized the opportunity. His next victim was a man named Chris DeVille. Up to this point, Dominic had only chosen either drug addicts or drifters, but Chris was neither of those things. In fact, Dominic really messed up because Chris's brother was a very well-known police officer. And this really reignited their focus for the serial killer at large. And they were extremely motivated to catch him. It's bad enough that, he had been doing what he had been doing to all of these other people. Now he had done it to one of their own.
Yeah.
The police had concluded that Dominic typically chose criminals because of them being escaped convicts or having some kind of a criminal connection, which would make them less likely or less motivated to want to go to the police. Because if you've noticed that his pattern has been picking people who are either trying to seek drugs or trying to prostitute themselves or trying to do something untoward that you might not want to go confess to a police officer that you were doing.
Yeah.
To put yourself in that kind of a situation. Or they just either were recent parolees or had a criminal past of some kind. And the officers really picked up on that. So they wanted to kind of use that to their advantage, which is when they contacted the parole officer Tom Lambert to get a list of the most recent parolees that he had. And they wanted to know if any of those parolees had had any unusual sexual encounters. They would then come across John Banning. He had actually encountered Dominic, who convinced Banning he was going to take him to have sex with a female. John got in the vehicle, but once they got to Dominic's trailer, it was quickly clear something was off, so John just turned and walked out of the trailer and just left. And Dominic didn't try to stop him.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now they had an exact physical description and someone who knew where the Bayou Strangler lived.
Nice.
Banning quickly agreed to show them where he lived, and off they went. However, without a warrant, police had to be careful. They got to the trailer and opted to just look in his mailbox instead of knocking on his door in an attempt to at least get his real name. And they did. They realized at that point his real name was Ronald Dominic. They brought him in for questioning after they had his name, and Dominic complied with no problems. He came across as very calm until he was asked for a DNA sample. That's when he became agitated. But he did ultimately agree to give him one. And once they had it, they had to let him go while they were waiting on the results to come back.
Oh, that sucks.
It does suck. They did have evidence such as like hair and semen that was left at some of the crime scenes. So they did have something to compare his DNA to place him at the scenes and to point him out as the killer.
Yeah.
And you'd think this little moment would trigger him to want to halt his killing spree for a minute, but no, it didn't. On November 5th, Nick Pellegrin would become Dominic's next victim. His body was found a week later. A few days after Nick was found, the DNA sample would come back. Obviously, Dominic was a match. However, the match was to mitochondrial DNA, not nuclear DNA, which is what they needed. So for anybody who's curious what the difference in that is, so when they have mitochondrial DNA, it's not a direct exact match to that person, but it's a match to that person's family, like their bloodline, meaning it's somebody in that bloodline's family.
I think I've heard of that before.
Whereas nuclear DNA says it is this person 100% without a doubt. Yeah. This is your person. So one gives you the direction of the bloodline. It says, okay, somebody in this family is your person. And nuclear says this is your person. So that's the difference between the two, for those that don't know. But again, they needed the nuclear DNA, not the mitochondrial. So again, they had to wait. But they knew they had their guy, so they decided they were going to start doing some 24/7 surveillance on him. Follow him everywhere he went.
Right.
You'd think that would be the end of it, right?
Yeah, you would think.
You would think. However, somehow he was able to get away just long enough to acquire yet another victim, Christopher Sutterfield.
With police tailing him?
Yep, he was able to get away. So his next victim was Christopher Sutterfield. He was found by the side of the road. This triggered police to move forward with what they had before anyone else was killed. They were infuriated at the audacity of this man. Because he knew he was being followed.
Yeah.
He knew. And they knew he knew. So they went ahead and moved forward with it. And by this point, Dominic was living in a homeless shelter. Police did find him. And that was because of his sister. She actually gave them the address to where he was staying. And Dominic was arrested. He would go without any resistance at all. And at this point, Dominic would confess to everything. He continually tried to portray himself as the victim, despite being the murderer. But Dominic's act didn't fool or convince anyone, and in the end, he was sentenced to 8 consecutive life terms.
Good deal.
So just to do like I always do and try to put a little more focus on the victims by the end, here's a list of all of his victims and their ages. Just a recap on that. You have David Mitchell, who was 19.
Ooh.
Gary Pierre, who was 20. Larry Ranson, who was 38. Oliver LeBanks, 27. Joseph Brown, 16.
Oh my gosh, he was a baby.
He was a baby. Bruce Williams, who was 18. Manuel Reed, who was 21. Angel Mejia, who was 34. Mitchell Johnson, also 34. Michael Vincent, 23. Kenneth Randolph Jr., 20. Annika Jones, 26. Detrell Woods, 19. Larry Matthews, 46. Michael Barnett, 21. Leon Lorette, 22. August Watkins, 31. Kurt Cunningham, 23. Alonzo Hogan, 28. Wayne Smith, 17. Chris DeVille, 40. Nicholas Pellegrin, 21. Christopher Sutterfield, 27. And that is the case on the monster known as the Bayou Strangler. People suck, man.
Yeah, I was gonna say
people are the worst. I mean, not all people, obviously, but like just human nature is just.
People are evil.
I just don't get it. I just don't get it.
I don't either. I don't understand why people have to do that. I mean, I just.
It is tragic, and obviously, rest in peace to all of the victims who are all gone way too soon at the hands of just a monstrous, horrible, selfish, terrible human being. But yeah, that's my case. Thank you guys for listening and hopefully hanging in there with us to the end. And we will hopefully see you on our next case. So for now, that is all.